She steps into the great hall, wearing a dress the shade of crushed emerald leaves. In the glow of rush torches, the silk shimmers like liquid spring. Courtiers gasp. The music pauses. A moment later, her lungs burn. Her vision blurs. She collapses upon stone, without a blade drawn, without a war cry, without a single clue. The feast goes on, yet the fragrance of death settles over roasted boar and honeyed pears. The dress keeps shining, as if proud of the work it has done. Cloth as executioner, beauty as silent blade. No sword, no arrow, no poison vial slipped into wine. Merely ribbon, thread, pigment, and vanity woven together. In the Middle Ages, this was not a fable told to frighten tailors' apprentices. It was daily life sown with hidden fangs. Think of a marketplace at dawn. Bolts of velvet stacked like rubies. Vendors praising dyes that glow brighter than Eucharistic glass. A young merchant's wife fingers a length of green satin. She imagines how it will whisper around her ankles as she walks past the guildmaster's wives. She does not hear the warning carried on the morning breeze. Arsenic does not smell. Picture a winter castle. Women dance in layered gowns brushed with animal fat to keep the chill at bay. Sparks drift from a candelabrum swayed by laughter. In an instant, the hall becomes a furnace. Silk ignites faster than dry straw. Flames sprint upward. Skirts turn to chimneys. Screams vanish beneath the roar. The fat-soaked cloth clings to skin, fusing silk and flesh into a single agony. The minstrels keep strumming, stunned, their fingers moving out of habit while bodies burn. Travel farther. A cramped workroom behind a thriving clothier. Spindles spin, needles stab. A boy no older than 10 inhales spores from wool sheared off plague-ridden sheep. Wool sold cheap after a siege. He coughs, laughs it off, stitches another cuff. Within a fortnight, he grows silent. The garment he helped create will cross a kingdom, embraced by noble shoulders, leaving his memory behind in a pile of rags and sputum. These are not chapters in a dusty codex. They are footprints across churchyards, coronation halls, and city gutters. Every thread is a vein pulsing with risk. Every color is an alchemy, part science, part superstition, part reckless appetite for status. You were told medieval life was brutal because of swords, famines, crusades. True. Yet danger also waited in wardrobe chests. A corset drawn too tight could snap a rib like kindling. A metal talisman sewn inside a child's cap, meant to block demons, could turn midday heat into lethal fever. The very shroud chosen for burial might trap heat, spark decay, and set a corpse alight beneath damp earth. No battlefield required. History teachers rarely dwell on such intimacies. They chart dynasties, map sieges, recite treaties. They skip the silent murders hidden in seams. So let us open those seams. Let us run our fingers along stitches stiff with centuries of sweat, blood, and greed. Let us listen for the faint echo of fabric rubbing against skin an instant before skin surrendered, because this is only the beginning. The ballroom blaze is only the first ember. The merchant wife gasping for breath is only the first whisper. Ahead, wait darker corridors lined with garments more treacherous than any gallows. Walk with me through them. Keep your hands at your sides. Do not brush the velvet. Do not inhale too deeply. The cloth remembers what it has done, and it hungers still. If the weight of this story sits in your chest like that shard of silk beneath its glass, subscribe. Here we refuse to let the quiet victims of history fade into footnotes. Every new episode digs under polished timelines, pulls out the hidden human cost, and lays it bare, so their unheard voices can echo in our own. Press subscribe, join the circle, and help keep the past from slipping back into silence. She was called Adelina, born beside the tidal canals of Bruges, raised on the rustle of silk and the hiss of sailcloth unfurling at dawn. As wife to a thriving wool merchant, she already owned gowns the shade of pomegranate seeds and cloaks lined with fur soft as candle smoke. Still, she craved the color no woman in the counting-house quarter yet possessed. A green so vivid it seemed pulled from crushed emeralds, bright enough to shame cathedral glass. The dyers whispered of it. The guild wives dreamed of it. Adelina vowed to wear it first. The recipe traveled west along trade roads, heavy with gossip, copper scraped from kettles, white arsenic ground finer than priestly incense, vinegar that stung the tongue. When boiled together, the mixture birthed crystals that glittered like frost under moonlight. Drop those crystals into a cauldron of simmering oil, and the water turned a color saints might mistake for paradise. In a workshop by the fish market, Adelina watched the master dyer stir the vat. Vapors curled upward, brilliant yet sour. She lifted a handkerchief to her lips, part courtesy, part delight at the drama. Every breath carried a sweetness laced with metal. The dyer's skin showed a faint green blush along his knuckles. He kept stirring. Bolts of raw silk hung from rafters, pale as unbaked bread. Each length vanished into the vat, emerged transformed, dripping emerald fire. The workers rinsed the cloth in river water until the barrel ran the color of envy. They beat the folds with wooden paddles to set the hue, then pegged them on lines above the cobbles. Afternoon sun struck the fabric, and passers-by halted mid-stride. The dyer bowed, teeth greenish, at the gum line. Adelina smiled, feeling the future cling to her ribs. The gown took shape quickly. Stiffened bodice, square neckline, sleeves puffed and slashed to reveal cream linen beneath. Tiny brass bells stitched along the hem so that every step would ring her triumph. She planned her entrance for the Midsummer Guild feast, a gathering where wives measured stature by sheen and shade. On the evening of the banquet, she bathed in rose petals, bound her hair with silver wire, drew the dress over her shift. The fabric kissed her shoulders with a cool hiss. In torchlight, the gown seemed to glow from within. She felt untouchable, a jewel set free from any crown. Inside the hall, men raised goblets, women whispered, musicians missed their cue. Adelina released a slow breath and tasted vinegar on her tongue. Warmth bloomed across her collarbones, pleasant at first, like sitting too near a hearth. She laughed it off, lifted her skirts, danced. Hours later, the warmth sharpened into needles. Her pulse thudded beneath stays trimmed with arsenic dust. She excused herself, reached the courtyard, gulped air heavy with summer lilies. The torches along the walls blurred, halos doubling. She pressed fingers to her throat, felt skin raw where the gown rubbed. Green powder glittered under her nails. At home, the sensation grew stranger. Lips peeled, small ulcers blossomed along gum and cheek. She blamed the spiced wine, the smoke, the lateness. Morning arrived with no relief. Her maid found her kneeling before the wardrobe, retching clear liquid onto planked floorboards, the green dress hanging nearby, like a mute accomplice. Days folded into weeks. Nails lifted from their beds. Hair slipped from its braids, clung to the pillow in dark ribbons. Doctors were summoned, men in felted hats reeking of wormwood. They bled her, placed leeches along her spine, recommended prayers, blamed humors. None asked about pigment. Adelina's husband, Lambert, paced outside the bedchamber counting up debts in his mind. The doctor's fees rivaled a cargo of fine wool. Meanwhile, gossip sprouted in taverns, the merchant's wife stricken by a curse of vanity. Rivals delighted, orders slowed. The emerald fad spread nonetheless. Other women commissioned the hue, declaring it the color of triumph. They had not seen Adelina's bedsheets dotted with blood, where her skin split overnight. By harvest season, she no longer rose to greet dawn. The bells on her dress were removed, sold to pay another healer. He suggested powdered pearls, argued that the moon governed such illnesses. Adelina laughed once, softly, mouth tasting of metal. She asked for the dress to be burned. The maid obeyed, feeding it to a hearth deep in the servant's wing. Flames licked the cloth, flared a terrifying green, filled the chimney with fumes that sent two scullions outside coughing. Her final evening came with rain, tapping slate roofs like impatient fingers. Candlelight cast olive shadows across her wasted frame. Lambert knelt, offered her a mirror trimmed in jet. She turned away. Skin on her cheeks bore blotches the shape of mapless islands, edges dark, centers ghost pale. Her breath rattled, smelled of vinegar and rot. She reached for Lambert's hand, but paused, as if fearing her touch carried death. She whispered that beauty is a bargain struck blind. Then she closed her eyes. No battle hymn, no plague bell, no dagger. Only silence, riffling rain, and the garnish of green that stained the room long after the candles died. In the weeks that followed, city officials inspected dye workshops. They found vats crusted with copper arseniate, floors dusted green. Workers' teeth were blackened stumps. The guild masters argued the hue was worth small risks. Wives kept ordering. The color traveled farther, along rivers, over mountains, into courts where queens demanded new shades for winter revels. Adelina's story faded, stitched into rumors shared by midwives at twilight. Yet the cloth remembered. It waited on lines above alleyways, waited in trunks beneath dowry linens, waited in church wardrobes beside priestly vestments. Its poison wore no badge, carried no scent, and green was not alone. Crimson drank mercury, violet loved lead. Even innocent white hid lime that could sear flesh if rain fell suddenly. The spectrum widened, a rainbow forged from hunger and pride, each shade sharpening its own unseen blade. The dress is gone. The grave is marked by simple oak. But somewhere, a dyer still stirs a cauldron, vapor rising, crystals forming, prophet beckoning. Threads dip, emerge shining, drip toxic promise onto stone. Remember Adelina, when the fabric calls your name. Remember the color that glowed like paradise and whispered like sin. Remember that beauty seldom comes empty-handed. The great hall of Chateau Saint-Léon smelled of beeswax and violets. Tapestries trembled in a mild spring draft. Candles fluttered overhead, and the floor glowed beneath 1,000 polished boot heels. Laughter rose like birds startled from reeds. Musicians plucked lutes, their fingers slick with sweat, racing to keep pace with the whirl of silk and satin. A new fashion ruled the season. Gowns stitched from gauzy layers of flax threads brushed with melted tallow. The fat gave the fabric a dewy sheen, kept skirts stiff in wide floating bell shapes, and coaxed torchlight into a soft halo around each dancer. Tailors called it mooncloth. Housewives called it miracle cloth. Alchemists called it gold without metal. The secret was animal grease, rendered from lamb and goose, whipped into the weave until the cloth drank it like thirsty sand. Everyone knew the rumors. Mooncloth loved flame. The faintest spark could kiss the hem and turn the wearer into a lantern. Yet the gowns weighed almost nothing, fluttered like moth wings, and shimmered brighter than any jewel. Beauty demanded tribute. Wives of merchants, daughters of viscounts, even widowed ladies on borrowed coin surrendered gladly. A scorching risk for a single night of admiration felt reasonable, even righteous. Better to blaze for one moment than pass unnoticed for a lifetime. That night, the Duchess of Saint-Leon hosted her midsummer masque. Masks of carved cherry wood hid faces, but the gowns revealed everything the wearers wished to confess: hope, rivalry, secret desperation. Servants trimmed candle wicks until they were no thicker than raven quills, trying to calm the flames. It did little. Wax rivers formed beneath each sconce. Hot tallow dripped onto flagstones, hissed, cooled, hardened into pale tears. Near the center of the hall, a girl in a gown, the hue of peach flesh, spun beneath a dangling constellation of brass lamps. She lifted her arms, edged with translucent ruffles, and the skirt flared like sunrise. Another woman, older, masked in silver, stretched to complement the workmanship. Her sleeve brushed a lamp chain, rattled it, set one small oil cup swaying. The oil sloshed. A tiny thread of fire slid over the lip and dropped. A single bead, no bigger than a ladybug, fell toward the floor and struck the peach hem. No one noticed at first. Fire prefers silence in its opening breath. It nibbled the fabric, tasting tallow, finding familiar kin. It spread upward in 2 breaths, sideward in 3. Then the skirt flared bright white, a bubble of flame blooming as fast as thought. Gasps shattered the music. The girl screamed once, sharp as breaking glass, and tried to step backward. The skirt folded in upon itself, the grease feeding heat faster than dry sticks. Flames licked her waist, climbed her stays, curled around thinning cotton ties, found her hair. A scent like roasting meat flooded the room. Panic vibrated the air. A young knight lunged forward, tore off his velvet cloak, tried to smother the blaze. The cloak caught. He flung it away, and now 2 fires danced across polished stone. Ladies scattered, slipping on wax, skirts bumping into sconces, sleeves brushing wicks. Sparks rained. Candle smoke twisted into black ropes. Within heartbeats, 3 gowns smoldered. Within another dozen heartbeats, 2 erupted. The music ceased. Shouts tumbled over each other. Some men dragged benches to widen a path to the fountains in the courtyard. Others froze, hands to mouths, powerless against a terror that wore perfume and lace. Flames climbed tapestries, found dust in crevices, devoured woven wool dyed with walnut and madder. The girl in peach thrashed, stumbled, fell. Her mask, half burned, fused to cheek and brow. The silver-masked woman who had brushed the chain knelt, praying aloud, her own hem smoldering gray embers. Smoke filled the hall, thick, sweet, oily, impossible to ignore, yet hard to breathe through. Voices choked into silence. Servants hurled buckets of wine, ale, even soup. Liquid hissed on embers, splattered glowing droplets that skittered like fireflies. Panic grew teeth. A page shattered a window with a chair, letting cool night air rush in. The draft breathed life into every ember. Drapes flared purple and gold, sparks mapping constellations on the ceiling. Those who reached the courtyard stood in rain-damp grass, trembling, gowns stained and dripping. They watched orange light pulse behind stained glass, watched smoke stream upward, carrying the scent of singed feathers and melting lacquer. Inside, stone walls would stand, but the splendor was already ash. At sunrise, the hall had cooled enough for inspection. Soot-coated vaulting arches. Pooled wax lay like frozen rivers. In the center, 5 black circles marked where women had fallen, skirts folding inward like charred petals. No drawn blade, No enemy army, no plague had touched them. Only vanity, grease, and a spark the size of a tear. The city magistrate issued a proclamation forbidding mooncloth at public gatherings. Merchants nodded, swore obedience, then whispered of clients who would pay double for forbidden texture. Dressmakers experimented with new mixtures, blending animal fat with ground seashell to slow ignition. Results were mixed. Fashion journals, hand-copied in cramped script, praised the resilience while quietly noting that quick hands and longer sleeves were still wise precautions. And the survivors. They spoke of the glow, the weightlessness, the way eyes followed them as if bewitched. Some swore never to wear such cloth again. Others hesitated, remembering the way torches gilded every curve. Fear battled vanity, and vanity won often enough for looms to keep spinning. Because beauty promises immortality, it whispers that danger is an exaggeration, that tragedy chooses only the careless, that flame can be outrun if one dances lightly enough. The night at Chateau Saint-Léon proved otherwise, yet within a fortnight, new invitations rode out across the valley. Another mask, another hall, another chance to burn brilliantly before fading. And that, believe it or not, was far from the worst horror stitched into medieval fashion. The flame claimed bodies swiftly. Other dangers moved slower, quieter, wearing the same seductive mask. Their story waits beyond this ember-lit doorway. The cloth has more teeth to bear, and we have only begun to count the wounds. His name was Milo, thin as a reed, nimble as a cat, no taller than the cutting table that filled Master Corvin's back-room atelier. Milo slept beneath that table on nights when the city gates closed too early, curled against bales of wool that smelled of wet dawn and something darker. At sunrise he swept shavings from the floor, fetched goose-quill chalk, threaded bone needles for the journeyman, and dreamed of the day Corvin might call him Cutter instead of boy. Corvin dressed the burgomaster's wife, the bishop's secretaries, even a duchess once. His signboard showed a golden bobbin glinting against painted midnight. Yet those polished clients never saw the alley where carts unloaded raw fleece. They never smelled the cargo, sour as crypt dust, bound in burlap, stamped with army seals, and smeared with wax that tried and failed to mask rot. The fleece came cheap. Soldiers had fallen by roadsides during an autumn campaign. Bodies stripped of coin, yet wrapped in blankets to keep the chill from settling too quickly. Quartermasters sold those blankets after frost hardened the corpses. Traders washed them in lye, beat them on rocks, brushed them with lavender oil, then carried the bundles north. Corvin knew the tale, but shrugged. A merchant counts profit in silence. Milo did not mind the odor at first. He found beauty in transformation. Hot water, soap, and alum turned matted gray tufts into clouds, white as fresh cream. Carding combs sang their metallic rasp, aligning fibers into satin sheets. Spinning wheels hummed. The workshop was a hive, every spindle a drone. Milo loved that music. He did not hear the coughs hiding inside it. One winter dusk, he worked alone. Oil lamps swinging above skeins hung to dry. He pressed a damp hank to his cheek and imagined how it would gleam once dyed royal crimson. The wool was warm, almost feverish, as if remembering the flesh it once covered. Milo inhaled. Dust tickled his throat. He coughed, shrugged, reached for the next hank. The same heat, the same faint tremor. Beneath the fibers, something shifted, like grains of sand. Fleas, stirred from slumber, crawled across his knuckles. He flicked them away, whispering a curse he had overheard from journeymen. By dawn, His throat burned deeper. A lump swelled beneath one ear, small as a bead yet pulsing. He hid it beneath his collar, fearing dismissal. Corvin prized neatness. Rashes meant unclean habits. Milo scrubbed his hands with vinegar and salt until they stung. Orders flooded in. The Baroness wanted capes lined with snow-white flannel, soft enough to shame mink. The guild master's daughter required a wedding gown with sleeves flowing like swan wings. Corvin grinned, eyes gleaming like coins in lamplight. He pushed the apprentices harder. Milo stood at the vat from dawn to moonrise, stirring cloth through steaming dye brewed from madder root. Fleas drifted atop the surface, scarlet halos spreading around them. The lump near his ear ripened to the size of a quail egg. Another blossomed in the hollow of his thigh. Fever crouched on his spine, whispering numbness along his limbs. He swayed above the vat, caught himself, tasted bile laced with iron. Corvin noticed. The master folded arms across a broad chest, scowled, and ordered Milo to the loft to rest. Work demanded clear hands. Milo climbed the ladder, each rung an echo in his skull. He curled on wool sacks that no longer felt like clouds. Heat radiated from within, turning breath to smoke even in that frigid loft. Night stretched, lamps guttered out. Milo dozed, surfaced, dozed again. In dreams, he walked a field blanketed with blankets. Each one rose, shook, revealed a hollow-eyed face. The faces whispered, "Wear me, warm me, remember me." Their breath carried dust and bells. Below, Corvin paced. 2 journeymen had developed coughs. One collapsed beside the pressing hearth, bruised black swellings like marbles under his arms. Corvin ordered him home. The man never reached his door. Word drifted back at dawn that he lay in the gutter, lips blue, eyes glossy as frozen wells. Rumor travels faster than fleas. By chapel time, the market whispered of plague. Not the grand death of earlier decades, but a smaller cousin, still hungry. City watchmen nailed iron crosses to shuttered homes. Physicians in waxed masks stalked alleys, their beaks stuffed with rosemary. Buyers avoided stalls where wool hung, yet orders already placed had to be filled. Nobility did not pause for rumor. Corvin pressed on, fueled by wrath and brandy. Milo woke to find swollen nodes split and leaking. Pain throbbed like a forge. He tried to rise, legs buckled. He listened to the workshop below, scissors snipping, irons hissing, voices muttered behind kerchiefs. No one climbed the ladder. No one dared. He drifted again. Voices blurred. A bell rang somewhere, slow tolls, each one a command to pray. Milo felt the cloth beneath him shift, alive with tiny feet. Fleas migrated from bale to bale, seeking fresh blood. His. Near midnight, Corvin climbed the ladder at last, candle in hand. He paused at the top, eyeing the boy. Candlelight painted hollows beneath cheekbones, traced sweat like molten bronze. The master inhaled, held the breath, set the candle on a crate. He knelt. Milo's lids fluttered. Corvin touched the back of a hand to Milo's brow, recoiled as if scalded. A flicker of regret, then calculation. Cloth steamed downstairs, orders overdue. Corvin sighed, drew a cloth soaked in vinegar, laid it over Milo's mouth, more for himself than for the boy. He whispered that Milo had served well. He promised to send a priest come dawn. He lied. Before descending, Corvin draped a half-finished velvet cloak over the boy, as if fine fabric might stand in for mercy. The cloak weighed almost nothing, dyed deepest night, destined for the cathedral treasury. Gold thread gleamed in the hem, winking. Milo's fevered hands clutched it, even as his pulse slowed. When the sun rose, the loft was silent. The cloak lay folded across Milo's chest, damp with final breath. Corvin climbed the ladder, two journeymen behind him. They wrapped the body in burlap, tied it with twine, carried it down the back stair and out through the alley before the street stirred. No tolling bell for apprentices. They dug a shallow pit by the tannery ditch. Quick lime, quicker prayers. Earth, tamped with the flat of a shovel. Corvin returned to his needles. Clients arrived within hours. Coach wheels crunching frost. They admired the new display. Cloaks of moonless velvet, gowns of snow-white flannel, hose softer than dove down. They never saw the burlap fibers caught beneath Corvin's fingernails. They never smelled vinegar masking guilt. They paid in silver, praised the cut, marveled at how masterful craft could banish winter chill. Some nights later, the Baroness wore her new cloak to a midnight mass. Candles flickered along the nave, casting warm halos above stone. She knelt, folded gloved hands, breathed incense heavy with frankincense and fear. On her way back to the manor, she coughed, a small cough, the kind one blames on cold air. 2 days passed. A bead-sized lump bloomed beneath her ear. Physicians arrived. They ordered prayers, hot bricks at her feet, tincture of wormwood. Servants whispered that the cloak smelled odd, like vinegar and wet hay. The steward burned it. Flames snapped verdant green, a memory of dye hidden in the lining. The steward crossed himself 3 times. Still the Baroness faded, as if cloth had stolen warmth the way thieves lift purses. She lingered 1 week, then fell silent, pearl rosary slipping from motionless fingers. The city rang its great bell. Nobles shuttered their halls, canceled feasts, isolated chambers where fabric new enough to gleam might still harbor invisible jaws. And Corvin, he kept sewing until his lungs rattled. Then he sold the shop to a rival and fled upriver, swearing the plague traveled only with rats, never with velvet. Behind him, the workshop stood empty, dust motes spinning in shafts of light, cloth bundles abandoned on tables like half-written confessions. Little Milo disappeared from all ledgers. Only the cutting table remembered his laughter. Only the loft remembered his last uneasy dream. The wool bales he slept upon were sold at auction, carted to a distant port, spun into yarn destined for courtly doublets. Somewhere far from the alley where Milo died, a nobleman preened in a mirror, admiring sleeves that draped like flowing wine, oblivious to the boy who paid flesh for that drape. The plague would fade come spring, swept aside by fresh winds, yet the cloth remained. It traveled. It learned silence. It waited for candlelight and warmth and the soft thud of a human pulse against velvet. Because the worst horrors seldom lurked in gutters. They preferred palace corridors, where no one expected death to wear silk. And the greatest horror of all unfolded not in workshops, but among those who could afford to ignore the stench of burlap and lime. Their story stands just beyond this stitch, hidden in perfumed wardrobes. The fabric grows impatient to reveal what it accomplished behind gilded doors. The hall of Chateau. La Clairière throbbed with viols and psalteries, every note stitched with perfume and candle smoke. On the polished flagstones, young Isabeau wheeled through the pavane beside the heir of Montferrand, her scarlet skirts cresting like slow fire. Each turn drew a breathy murmur from the gallery, for her waist appeared narrow as a hawk's throat, hips flaring beneath stiffened velvet panels, posture straight as altar stone. The corset beneath that velvet was fresh from a Parisian modiste who boasted of stays cut from baleen, slats cured in brine and sun, laced by silk cords no thicker than a spider's strand. Isabeau's mother, Dame Constance, had paid 2 years' rent for it, then spent an afternoon tightening the garment until the girl's pulse leaped visible at her neck. Isabeau had not eaten since sunrise. Broth alone, sipped in silence, lips trembling. Constance praised discipline, said hunger sharpened beauty, the way whetstones awaken steel. She pulled each lace with a prayer, knuckles whitening, commanding the waist to yield another finger's breadth. Isabeau gasped, eyes glazing, but Constance spoke of matches, dowries, futures. She declared pain the toll exacted by heaven for earthly favor. The laces closed. A final knot vanished beneath tassels. By nightfall, Isabeau floated across the hall on legs she could scarcely feel. Her vision glittered at the edges, gold flecks drifting like motes in church sunbeams. She ignored them. Musicians accelerated, couples spun, hot blood hammered inside her ribs, searching for room that no longer existed. The final cadence struck. Dancers bowed. Applause burst in waves. Isabeau dipped, head lowered, and something within her chest whispered like parchment tearing. She rose too swiftly. A jolt of brightness flooded her sight. The hall tilted. She smiled, unwilling to disrupt the applause, but her smile slipped sideways. The air of Montferrand reached out. She staggered, mouth opening, though breath failed to arrive. Blood blossomed beneath her tongue, copper and heat. She collapsed without a scream. The corset held her torso rigid, even as her knees struck stone. A collective gasp rippled through silks and brocades. Constance rushed forward, skirts thrashing, demanding space. Two stewards lifted Isabeau, but the rigid stays prevented bending. Her body arched unnaturally, shoulders and hips touching arms, midsection frozen in cruel grace. Physicians were summoned. They cut laces with fruit knives, each snip releasing a sigh of satin, but too late. Beneath chemise and ribbon, ribs had cracked inward, jagged ends piercing tender lung tissue. Blood pooled in pleural dark, drowning ceaselessly. Every shallow inhale brought a wet rattle, red froth leaking at parted lips. Constance pressed linen to her daughter's mouth, begging, commanding, bargaining. Isabeau's eyes drifted across vaulted beams glowing with torchlight she would never see again. Breath faded to hush. Stillness settled. Dawn found the manor draped in black gauze. Surgeons laid the body upon a pine trestle and opened the chest cavity by candle, seeking explanation to soothe maternal torment. They peeled flesh from bone, murmured over splinters of ivory rib thrust like daggers through rose-pink lung tissue. Sternum hairline cracked, heart bruised where skeletal shards had kissed it. They agreed the death blow landed long before collapse, each dance step pushing broken bone deeper until music silenced itself inside her. They spoke of blood that kept flowing even as pulse failed, trapped within corset walls, unable to spill outward, turning inward instead, drowning the singer within. They washed tools in wine, stitched the incision with catgut, and crossed themselves. Constance listened, face stone pale. She demanded the corset returned. She clutched it like evidence, fingers tracing whale baleen warped by pressure. She wept not, for salt tears threatened to loosen the dignity she wore tighter than any lace. Burial came beneath low cloud. A marble effigy could not be carved in time, so Isabeau lay in an oak coffin lined with the very velvet she had worn. Ribbons covered the ruined stays, as if modesty still mattered. Constance insisted the coffin be sealed quickly, for decay offended heaven. 4 bearers carried it down misty lanes toward the family crypt, carved into limestone. Monk chants followed like faint wings. Soil closed, candles guttered, Mourners drifted away. Yet peace eluded Constance. Night after night she woke, certain she heard silk rustle beyond the bedchamber door. Servants swore they smelled blood-tinged perfume near the crypt, a metallic sweetness that clung to torch wicks. The steward claimed scratches marred the inside of the coffin lid, though no one dared unseal it. Rumor whispered that breath can linger in lungs collapsed but unemptied, that sudden pressure could mimic death, surrendering faint spark only after burial's weight settles. Physicians scoffed, yet the whispers grew teeth. Constance stood before the sealed crypt one overcast dusk, corset clutched to her breast, and swore she felt warmth still trapped in the whale's bone curves. She imagined her daughter's heart beating faintly against rigid walls, bruised yet stubborn, waiting for relief that never came. Her own lungs tightened. She shuddered, loosening a single lace at her collar before fleeing the twilight. Because sometimes the grave does not finish the work that fashion begins. Sometimes breath steals back in the dark, finds itself caged, and claws stone. Sometimes death waits patiently for burial to complete the lesson, and the garments, neat and folded, listen from wardrobe shadows, ready to tighten again when vanity calls their name. The decree was read at dawn, when fog still clung to the churchyard yews. Father Mathieu unrolled the parchment, voice brittle, breath frosting the air. He declared that from this hour, no soul might be laid to rest wrapped in wool. Silk shrouds permitted, linen allowed, hemp tolerated for the poor, wool condemned. The words landed like stones, dull and final, echoed by crows waking in bell tower niches. Parishioners shifted, gripping cloaks spun from the very fiber now cursed. For generations they had buried kin in the cloth they wore in life. Wool warmed the living. Therefore it must comfort the dead. But the council of bishops had spoken. Wool smothered the soul, they claimed, trapping earthly heat, holding it so fiercely that hellfire found a welcome path. Graves that should have chilled grew warm. Coffins, when lifted to new ground, revealed bones tinted charcoal, skulls kissed by flame without candle or torch. At first, folk whispered that priests exaggerated, until a grave digger named Cole Pendant une Nuit broke a spade against stone in the old cemetery and uncovered a coffin half collapsed, lid split by pressure from within. He called the sexton. They pried boards apart. Inside lay a skeleton scorched jet black, ribs curled inward as though embracing a furnace. Because no rot flavored the wood, scholars argued the burning happened after burial. No torch could slip through packed earth. Only heat born inside the shroud itself. Word raced beyond villages, over ridges, down rivers. In parchment chronicles, monks sketched diagrams of charred femurs. They wrote of wool, spinning heat long after lungs forgot breath. They spoke of devils crawling through fleece like sparks through tinder. They warned that Satan coveted the lanolin scent. Families mourned anew, fearing that beloved ancestors roasted beneath stone. Some disinterred coffins, unwound woolen blankets, rewrapped bones in flax, sprinkled holy water, thick as summer rain. They prayed the soul might cool, even now. Others refused, gripping tradition harder, insisting warmth signaled care. They lit candles to Samblé, guardian of throats and fleece, begging him to temper the cloth. Years dripped forward. Then came the scholar Bertrand de Villiers, itinerant physician, collector of whispers. He traveled with a cart stacked high with bone fragments sealed in wax. He scoured cemeteries where soil slumped suspiciously, where marble cracked despite mild winters. He lifted lids, Saw hollows blackened, hems of shrouds melted into glossy beads. He carried samples to abbey laboratories, ground them beneath mortars, smelled char on powdered calcium. He wrote that combustion required oils locked within wool, released when flesh decayed, sparking a slow smolder that became sudden blaze. His treatise spoke of pockets of methane birthed in silence, ignited by friction as coffins shifted. Monks copied his words, yet added margins, warning of infernal intervention. Knowledge and dread shared a pillow. Meanwhile, spinners kept wheels turning. Shepherds drove flocks across moors, fleece swelling heavy with autumn rain. Markets in Bruges and Ghent glittered with dyed broadcloth, crimsons and azures filling barges. No edict could throttle appetite for texture soft as sighs. Merchants sold burial sets in secret, woolen winding sheets, stitched with tiny silver crosses meant to outshine flame. Buyers winked, counting coins, weighing fear against tradition. The scales tipped often toward comfort. Archbishops answered with sterner bands. Bells tolled, processions wound through lanes, clerics carrying linen swathes aloft like banners of salvation. They chanted that linen breathed, wool suffocated, linen cooled, wool beckoned the pit. Some towns surrendered, others only nodded, then returned to the familiar tug of loom and shuttle once censors passed. Centuries slipped. Village tales hardened into legend. Children dared one another to touch sheep after sunset, lest embers spark beneath the fleece. A nursery rhyme warned that wool called fire the way song calls birds. Brides tucked scraps of linen inside bodices when marrying in wool gowns, small insurance that death would find at least one pathway free of heat. Archaeologists arrived long after plague cemeteries fell silent. They dug trenches where ground sagged, cataloged rosary beads, measured coffin nails bent by collapse. In one pit, they found a skeleton whose lower legs were white bone, hugged by ash-gray stockings fused to tibia. Thigh bones blackened, spine intact but brittle, vertebrae crumbling at a brush of air. Above the skull remained a twist of thread, charred yet recognizably wool, still smelling faintly of smoke despite centuries of damp earth. The burial dated to the very decade of the ban, evidence that law trailed practice, that habit outweighed fear. Reports filled academic journals. Thermographs showed how wool retained exothermic decay heat longer than linen. Gas chromatography revealed traces of lanolin breakdown products that oxidized explosively in sealed boxes. Science offered clear cause, yet even the scientists wrote with hush, as though acknowledging something primal beyond numbers. They avoided burial sites after dusk. They spoke softly in labs, where shrouds unfurled under fluorescent glare. In village chapels, the story pivoted. Priests began preaching that hell envied wool for its godly warmth and thus tried to claim it. So, to spare souls, wool must remain with the living. A paradox clothed in doctrine. Wool praised as blessing, banned as threat. Congregations nodded, content with logic woven from fear and comfort stitched together. One rainy feast day, Father Mathieu stood again before his flock. He lifted the same parchment, edges frayed, ink brownish. He spoke slower, gentler. He told them a corpse burned not from sin, but from legacy. Fashion reached beyond heartbeat, beyond final breath. Choices of cloth shaped the journey of flesh and spirit alike. He ended with a whisper, "The grave should cool, not cook." Some left the church resolved to be buried in linen. Others hugged wool cloaks tighter against drizzle, muttering that cold earth demanded soft defiance. No decree would unravel devotion knitted by generations. The cemetery behind the chapel broadened over time. Marble leaned, moss thickened, epitaphs softened to indistinct hums. Under one stone flaked by frost lay a coffin lined with wool that once brushed a bride's cheek. At midsummer, archaeologists opened it, curious. The air that escaped was warm, sweet, ever so faintly singed. They sealed the lid again, noted the phenomenon, moved on, feet crunching gravel in wary silence. Because the dead, too, are victims of fashion. Brother Armand walked with ash on his sandals. It never washed away, even after rain scoured the flagstones. Even after penitents scrubbed the cloister walk with brine and thyme, a gray film clung to the leather, the kind of stain that remembers heat. He carried a cedar chest tucked beneath one arm. Inside lay scraps of brocade, velvet cuffs, ribbons bright as plums. All waited for the fire he promised them. Years earlier, he had been simply Armand of Montrouge, apprentice to a vintner, cheerfully ordinary. His younger sister Lucette was the extraordinary one. She sang at dawn while hauling water. She plaited marigolds into her braid. She longed for festivals, where colored lamps swung over the river. The year she turned 17, she convinced their mother to allow a single indulgence. A gown cut daringly low in the back, sleeves slashed to reveal silk lining. Tailors called it a swan gown, whispering that noble ladies wore the same shape in Paris. To pay, Lucette stitched until her fingers cramped, repairing altar cloths for the parish priest. She never complained. Beauty was worth threadbare thumbs. Festival night arrived. Lanterns drifted on the current like captive stars. Lucette stepped onto the quay in her swan gown, laughter spilling ahead of her. Armand followed at a distance, protective, amused, slightly embarrassed by how many heads swiveled. The gown shimmered as she spun, each movement exposing a flash of pale shoulder. A ripple of inner lining dyed with crushed cochineal. The crowd loved it. Midway through the dance, a torch toppled, striking a garland. A spark landed on Lucette's hem. Grease from the finishing wax kissed flame, and the skirt blossomed into white fire. Armand heard the crackle before he saw the light. He pushed through dancers, but the blaze leaped faster than any brother's arm. Lucette spun once, because pain had not yet reached her mind. Confusion painted across her face like dawn drizzle. Then she screamed. That sound never left Armand's ears. The fire ended her singing voice first, then breath, then everything. Ash dusted the flagstones where her laughter had been. Armand knelt, smoothing what remained, fingers trembling. Someone threw a cloak over her as if modesty still mattered. The cloak smoked, hissed, and Armand felt the heat through the cloth. The parish buried Lucette in linen, hastily, claiming wool might tempt hellfire. The sermon called her death a lesson against vanity. Armand listened, hands clasped so tightly nails cut skin. He tasted blood mixed with grief. Something inside him shifted. He entered the monastery at midsummer. The abbot welcomed his zeal. Years passed, gray as parchment. Armand learned Latin ports of the Psalms, recipes for ink, ways to prune vines in silence. Yet every dawn he revisited that key, heard the sizzle of silk, smelled the animal fat in the flames. And he planned. The countryside bred a new fashion that summer. Gowns stiffened with resin, bodices etched in gilt wire, hoods fringed with fox fur slicked with oil. Women floated through markets like walking candelabras. Armand saw danger cloaked as elegance. He begged tailors to reconsider. They laughed, saying a monk knew nothing of longing. He preached in village squares, warning that cloth could kill. Merchants mocked him, calling him Brother Cinders. Then a child died. A baker's daughter twirled too near the bread oven, skirts glazed with tallow catching a stray ember. She was 8, cheeks still apple round. The blaze devoured her in breaths. Townsfolk wept, but the shops kept selling waxed cloth. Armand snapped. He gathered an iron brazier, dragged it to the crossroads, and lit a pyre fed by his own prayer rope. He invited mothers to bring garments they feared. Some did. Most watched. Armand spoke without lilt. Beauty lures flame. Silk covets smoke. Fleece thirsts for infernal warmth. He fed ribbons into the fire until sparks danced like wasps. When the wind shifted ash onto onlookers, several stepped back. Yet others stepped forward, eyes wide, as though recognizing a truth that had lurked inside them. Word traveled. Soon, villagers appeared, carrying gowns wrapped in brown paper. Drastic confessions clutched to chests. They whispered that Brother Armand freed them from temptation. He burned the parcels one by one, murmuring half-remembered hymns, voice hoarse. Cloth merchants felt coins slip away like sand. They petitioned the bishop to silence the monk. Instead, the bishop appointed Armand as itinerant censor of garments, seeing advantage in the fervor. The church had long battled vanity. Here was a blade sharper than sermon. Armand accepted, though each appointment reopened the wound called Lucette. He journeyed town to town. Wherever he arrived, bells tolled and people gathered. He inspected wardrobes, marking some garments with chalk crosses denoting forgivable. Others he condemned as fire traps or lust snares. Those he stuffed into carts and set alight outside city walls. The flames painted his face orange. Children watched, awed, fearful. Mothers clutched scapulars. Soon hysteria sprouted vines. Husbands accused wives of harboring sinful lace. Neighbors spied through shutters for glimpses of shimmering sleeves. A woman in Auxerre fainted when her neighbor suggested the fur on her collar gleamed too brightly. She awoke to find the collar ripped away, smoldering in mud. Crowds shouted blessings at the smoke. Tailors adapted. They stitched charms of linen inside wool hems, embroidered verses to appease Armand. Peddlers sold scapulars, promising to extinguish sin even if cloth burned. Parents tied scrap iron over children's hearts, claiming it repelled sparks. Smithies hammered small iron plates embossed with angels. Women slipped them into corsets as shields. Armand never endorsed these trinkets, yet rumor granted them power. One winter market, a girl no taller than the fruit stall approached Armand. She wore a cloak, patched with dull wool, yet pinned at her breast shone a polished iron disc. She told the monk her mother said it made her safe. Armand frowned, kneeling, asking her name. "Marion," she whispered. He lifted the disc. Cold, heavy, a crude angel etched by shaky hand. He imagined sparks striking metal, transferring heat to skin beneath. He imagined Marion running, talisman searing flesh, leaving a brand shaped like the Holy Host. His stomach twisted. That evening, a candle toppled inside the inn where Marion's family lodged. Flame licked draperies, leaped to straw pallets. Guests fled. Marion tripped on the stairs, cloak tangling her legs. When Armand reached her, the cloak smoked, iron hot, pressed against her chest. He ripped it free, burning his palm. Marion lay unconscious. The healer said the iron shield had concentrated heat, scalding lungs through thin ribs. She lingered 2 nights, then slipped away, a sigh no louder than a mouse. Armand carried the warped disc in his satchel afterwards, weight of a small moon. He preached harder, voice ragged, but each sermon birthed fresh panic. Women flung garments onto bonfires without care for season, stood shivering in linen shifts as snow fell. Children wore talismans heavier than their hearts could bear. Fashion had turned battlefield, and fear wore the banner of faith. At Lent, a procession marched through St. Antonin, penitents barefoot upon frost, dragging carts piled with dresses still smelling of lavender chests. Someone set torch to the carts. Flames soared, sparks swirling like drunken bees. Wind gusted. A farmhouse roof caught, hay ignited. By dawn, stables lay black, horses silent. Villagers stared at Brother Armand, ash dusting his eyelashes, and wondered whether deliverance had cost too much. The bishop summoned him, face stern beneath gilded mitre. Word had reached Rome that bonfires of vanity threatened tithe crops. Armand stood silent, fingers wrapped around the iron disc in his robe. The bishop forbade further burnings without diocesan sanction. He ordered Armand to retreat to a priory and compose treatises instead of igniting them. Armand bowed, yet his gaze drifted past the bishop, seeing only Lucette's face framed by fire. He obeyed outwardly. In an abandoned herb garden behind the priory, he built a small kiln from broken tiles. At dusk, he carried sacks of condemned garments to that hidden mouth, feeding it handfuls so the smoke rose thin, lost among kitchen chimneys. The novice, assigned to the garden, noticed charred scraps beneath time and whispered, but no one listened to novices. Armand wrote a tract titled Garments of Gehenna. He described Lucette, though never by name. He described Marion, though never by age. He urged tailors to line bodices with linen, to forsake wax finishes, to respect distance between flame and hem. Copyists inked the pages. The tract crept through monasteries like an ember seeking dry kindling. Some abbots praised its fervor, others condemned its gloom. Meanwhile, bonfires waned, yet fear endured, roosting inside wardrobes. Armand aged faster than seasons, hair thinned, spine bent, but his stride held ember energy. One twilight he collapsed near the garden kiln, chest rattling. Brothers carried him to the infirmary. Fever climbed. In delirium, he begged someone to cut laces, though no corset bound him. He imagined iron pressed to his ribs, branding the sin he failed to cleanse. He whispered Lucette, whispered Marion, whispered wool that blooms into fire beneath earth. He asked if children still trust shields that scorch them. No brother could answer. He died just after the monastery bell marked Compline. They found the iron disc beneath his pillow, edges dulled by years of turning in nervous fingers. The abbot ordered it buried with him, hoping to submerge the legend. The garden kiln was dismantled, shards tossed into the river. Yet stories refuse shallow graves. Merchants still recount a monk who burned dresses until skies smelled of tallow and guilt. Mothers still tuck linen inside newborn wrappings, quoting Brother Armand, though none read his tract. Tailors still debate whether flame loves arrogance or merely wax. And in quiet wardrobes across the valley, ribbons dream of lantern light, silk ponders sparks, wool remembers warm graves. Because sermons fade, but fabric keeps listening, waiting for the next hand to trust its promise. The children it failed to spare toss in restless sleep, their talismans gone cold, yet memory hot. You cycle knots tighter, stitch after stitch, every thread humming with the voice of a monk who tried to save the world by fire and learned too late that flame rarely keeps allies. Even children were not spared by their supposed shields. The midsummer fair of Saint Agathe rose at dawn, like a riot of color against wheat gold fields. Crimson banners snapped above stalls of sugared almonds. Fiddlers scraped jigs, that chased sleep from bleary eyes, smoke from roasting lamb, braided with incense drifting from a roadside shrine. Crowds pressed inward, thirsting for barter, for gossip, for marvels promised by traveling conjurers. Among the tide walked a cobbler named Gilles, his wife Colette, and their only child, a boy of 7 summers called Julien. Julien wore a cap hammered from pewter gray iron, forged thin, polished bright, crowned with a tiny wrought cross. It sat heavy upon hair the hue of barley, rim biting soft ears. The village priest had blessed the cap at Candlemas, anointing it with oil and a sliver of palm ash. Demons hunted children born during the waning moon, he said, and only cold metal warded their claws. Gilles and Colette had knelt, breath held, while the priest tied a leather strap beneath the boy's chin and warned them never to loosen it beyond nightfall prayers. Faith demands constancy. Protection demands obedience. Julien endured aches without complaint. He had seen the priest hold a newborn aloft and declare the infant safe only when a brass amulet touched soft fontanelle. He had watched a neighbor girl scrub her iron anklet raw into her skin, yet still thank heaven for the bruise. Pain was simply the sound of evil failing to enter. The fair glittered with sun, strong enough to bleach flags in hours. Gilles bargained for lamb tallow and shoe buckles. Colette lingered near a stall of combs carved from horn. Julien darted ahead, entranced by painted puppets dancing on sticks. Sweat pooled under his cap, dripped along temples, vanished into dust at his feet. He swiped a sleeve across brow, smearing dirt. The strap under his chin chafed, leather slicked now, edges biting deeper each time he swallowed. A ballad singer launched into a tale of crusaders. The crowd pressed closer, bodies forming a wall that trapped every gust of breeze. Heat thickened like wool soaked in broth. Julien's breath grew shallow. He reached for Colette, fingers brushing her skirt, but she leaned forward to drop coins into the singer's hat. He tried to speak. Sound lodged against the metal band at his forehead. He tasted copper. The puppeteer cried encore. Laughter rose. A goat bleated from the livestock pen. Julien saw dots drifting across vision, fireflies at midday. He tugged the strap. It refused. He fumbled at the knot, nails catching. The cap slid a fraction, searing scalp where sun stove through bare metal. He whimpered. A tinker noticed the boy swaying, reached out. Gilles thanked him, hoisted his son onto broad shoulders. Julien's eyes rolled upward. Heat radiated through Gilles' tunic. The father set him down beside the fountain, where merchants cooled melons. He knelt to unlatch the strap. A bark rose behind him. Father Léonce, cassock flapping like a crow's wing, stepped between Gilles and the boy. The priest's voice cut the murmur. He reminded Gilles of the vow made. Remove the cap here, amid pagans and jesters, and darkness will pierce the child before sunset. Colette clasped hands to lips. She pleaded with eyes, not words. Gilles hesitated. Julien leaned against the fountain wall, skin the shade of wax. He whispered that he was thirsty. Father Léonce drew a vial of holy water, trickled a few drops onto Julien's tongue. He proclaimed the boy refreshed by grace. The crowd nodded. Faith stronger than thirst. Sun climbed higher. Shadows retreated beneath stalls like beaten dogs. Pewter metal drank light, spat it back in waves. Julien's breath became a thin whistle. Knees buckled. Priest urged parents to carry him to the shade of Saint Agathe's reliquary tent, where relics cooled souls. Inside, candles smoked black. The cap gleamed above sputtering wicks. Gilles laid Julien on a rug of goat hide. Colette fanned him with a woodcut flyer advertising miracle cures. Father Léonce recited psalm lines. Julien's chest rose, fell, shuddered. The iron cross at crown reflected candle flame onto vaulted canvas, a tiny sun mocking the real one overhead. Moments stretched taut as drawn wire. Julien's limbs jerked once, twice, then stilled. A hush swallowed psalm. Colette pressed ear to his lips, heard nothing but the tremor of her own blood. She screamed. Gilles tore at the strap. Leather parted. The cap clanged upon floorboards. Heat shimmered from its inner rim, hot enough to blister fingers. Gilles cradled his son, rocked, called his name. Julien's eyes stared ceilingward, unblinking, pupils blown wide as eclipse. Father Léonce muttered that heaven sometimes claims the pure early. He traced a cross in soot above the child's brow. Colette pushed him aside, sobs raw. Outside, fiddles still played. Bells of the carousel rang. A vendor shouted price for sweet cider. A notary attached to the bishop's court recorded the death. His parchment entry noted cause as divine summons complicated by summer ague. No mention of iron, of sweat, of leather. But another document survived. A letter from the fair's healer to the diocesan physician describing a corpse warm an hour after breath fled. Scalp blistered beneath a helmet of sainted metal. The healer wrote of brain fever baked by faith. The physician filed it among curiosities. Weeks later, the diocese issued a brief caution. Children may remove blessed armor during extreme heat if parents recite doubled prayers. Father Léonce read the clause from the pulpit, voice thin. Some parishioners nodded. Others kept iron circlets upon infants, unwilling to wager eternity on weather. They believed devils choose the moment vigilance falters, not the moment flesh fails. Gilles sealed Julien's cap inside a cedar coffer. He buried it at the foot of the garden pear tree. Colette could not watch. Nights, she sat by the hearth, clutching a torn flyer, fanning embers that needed no air. She dreamed of a fair where puppets twirled and a boy laughed beneath an uncovered sky. Faith proved stronger than instinct, yet instinct wept louder. Somewhere beyond their grief, iron caps still glinted on small foreheads, each one a promise forged of fear, each one waiting for the next noon sun. The stories you have heard burn bright, but embers hide beneath every telling. With the light dimmed and the clamor fading, step back, narrow your eyes, and consider how else these tragedies might be read. 3 paths unfold, twisted in shadow, yet still leading toward the same silent graves. Walk each one, taste the dust, feel how the fabric of certainty unravels thread by thread. First path, the conspiracy of the looms. Imagine guild halls where masters sip clove wine, laughter echoing off oak beams blackened by years of smoke. They speak of markets, of rivals, of coins clinking like distant bells. They know danger lurks in waxed silk and arsenic green. They know baleen corsets snap ribs, iron caps bake skulls, wool shrouds smolder beneath earth. Knowledge is power. Power is profit. So they hold it close. Better to whisper that style is changed than confess the thread is laced with death. Better to claim new dyes only dazzle than admit they poison breath. Journeymen who ask too many questions find contracts dissolved. Apprentices learn silence faster than seam stitches. Guild charters trumpet safety, but secret ledgers bloom fat with gold. Each tragedy therefore serves the loom. A burned bride demands another gown for her grieving sister. A plague-struck tailor leaves a shop ripe for takeover. Flame and fever become marketing tools. The guilds flourish, Cities sparkle in fresh colors, and somewhere a ledger records every copper earned from every corpse wrapped head to toe in faultless style. Second path, the Church of Self-Wounds. Picture stone naves where candles gutter in drafts that smell of damp confession. Sermons thunder that pride leads to damnation. Bodies must be tamed, not praised. Pain purifies. A mistress squeezes her waist until bone cracks. Convinced discipline sings louder than joy. A mother knots iron to her son's brow, so angels will mark the scar and guide him. A widow buys woolen burial cloth scoured in lye, so strong it burns her palms, believing the sting will shorten purgatory. No loom need plot. No merchant need deceive. The faithful demand the chains themselves. They crave the kiss of hardship, see grace in bruise and blister. Trust that heaven counts each throb as tithe. Cloth is merely the chosen scourge, softer on the eye than whips, easier to hide beneath lace. When flesh fails, priests sigh and speak of mysterious providence. Parishioners nod, resolved to tie the next knot tighter. Their children watch, learn, repeat. Third path, the great unseeing, a pageantry of denial draped over every mirror. Tailors boast that new silk gleams like starlight. Shoppers applaud, blinded by shimmer. Physicians note rashes, fevers, faintings, yet file them under weak constitution. Merchants widen door frames so hoop skirts may pass, ignoring how skirts snag candles and birth infernos. Mothers hush daughters who gasp for breath, murmuring that beauty requires silence. Fathers compliment iron talismans, proud of care, deaf to whimpers beneath the metal. Even after funerals, the talk circles back to color, to cut, to social standing. Everyone half knows the truth. No one bears the chill of knowing it fully. Mass amnesia grows thick as mothballs, muffling common sense. The city spins like a spindle, joyous, blind, unstoppable, until a spark lands and light returns too late. In the bright ruin, every survivor swears they could not have foreseen, though charred warnings were stitched across every hem. Three paths, all convincing, all incomplete. Perhaps the guilds plotted, yet only because congregations begged for penance. Perhaps the faithful ached for pain, yet only because merchants glamored suffering into elegance. Perhaps blindness reigned, because both forces pulled threads over every face. Pull the cloth one way, it forms a shroud. Pull it another, it forms a curtain. Either way, the view is lost. A scholar once wrote that fear is a tailor with infinite needles. It sews illusions so snug, the wearer forgets where skin ends and costume begins. When the costume ignites, is it the fabric that slays, or the dread stitched years before that told the victim to stand still and burn without question? We do not know. We may never know. The archives hold ledgers, sermons, medical ledgers, none printed in ink, dark enough to blot out doubt. Walk back through the halls of flame and corset and iron cap. You will hear two voices breathing inside every garment. One voice belongs to the cloth. The other belongs to the mind. Sometimes they sing in unison. Sometimes they drag each other toward graves. Step closer and the harmony blurs. Perhaps the dress killed. Perhaps the fear of living without it killed more surely. In the quiet that follows, only ashes remain, and even they cannot decide whose hand struck the match. The archaeologists had nearly finished cataloging the soil layers beneath the old Bruges townhouse when a glint of color caught the lowest lamp. It was no more than a curl of fabric, scarcely the length of a thumb, caught in the crevice between two bricks, burned black by centuries of hearth smoke. Yet it shimmered, an impossible green, brighter than any moss or emerald, a hue that had no right to survive damp basements and hungry beetles. The lead researcher lifted it with tweezers, turned it toward the weak winter sun, and felt breath tighten. Microfibers of early silk, saturated with arsenic crystals, still radiated the same wicked promise that once dazzled Adelina of the canals. Records say she collapsed at a guild feast, lungs scarred from toxins before the first toast cooled. Her husband stored the gown in a cedar chest, intending to sell the silk to recoup the doctor's fees. Fire consumed the chest during a later plague purge, but one ghost thread escaped the blaze, drifted through floorboards, and slept until our century coaxed it awake. Now it lies in a shallow dish beneath glass, powerless at last, yet still luminous. A sliver of silent vanity, small enough to trap an entire era's grief. Stand close, and you can almost smell vinegar and copper. Hear minstrels forgetting their melody when she first entered the hall. You can picture the way torchlight crawled along each fold, how rivals measured her with envy, how she herself felt the gown tighten, not understanding the embrace was lethal. History textbooks will call her death anecdotal, collateral to progress in dye chemistry. But in this dish, the story refuses summary. It flares again, reminding us that whole centuries pivoted on such private flashes of desire. We have walked through halls of flame, listened to corsets crack ribs, knelt inside tents where iron caps baked children, opened graves warm from wool's hidden fire. We have entertained conspiracies, devotions, and the great unseeing that binds them. Yet all those threads knot back to this single scrap of green silk, proof that beauty can outlive the body it betrays, proof that fashion can bury truth deeper than any coffin. The curator will file it under textile fragment, late medieval, sterilize it, archive it. Visitors will shuffle past, unaware that the glass protects them as much as it protects the artifact. They will never hear the whisper hiding in the weave. She only wanted to be beautiful, and she died without words. Now, we speak for her. Has this journey shifted the way you look at the clothes hanging in your closet, or the mirror waiting in your hallway? Write, "Beauty has a price" in the comments if you feel the chill of that green silk when you picture the next trend. Then tell us which part of tonight's tale cut deepest. Let's weave a conversation the merchants, priests, and tailors of the past can no longer dodge, and maybe stitch a warning into the fashions yet to come.